Welcome to Conversations in a Vintage Shop, a podcast from behind my counter between customers. Join me while I sit behind my retail counter and just have a conversation with you, or with myself. While I look out the window, observe what I see, things that are happening in the store today, throughout the week, and just fun little stories that I have from my time as a business owner. This is something that you find interesting, then keep listening, and I appreciate you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me on episode 4 of Conversations in a Vintage Shop. And today, our episode is going to revolve around something that I have been very vocal about on a lot of my social media pages, and that is my journey in starting this humble little vintage shop. And the topic of how to start a vintage shop is something I really wanted to focus on because when I started my particular store, there were no resources. Everything was how to start a restaurant, how to start a coffee shop, how to start a retail boutique, things that are a little bit more common. And I found myself really having a hard time figuring out where to start and where to find help. So my goal is to make this episode not only a resource for people like me who had wanted to start what some would call a niche business, but just kind of an education on some of the pitfalls that can happen when you're kind of doing this all on your own. I know this is a very specific topic, but I know that there are pieces of what I've experienced that a lot of you could use when starting your own small business. And again, I want to be that resource for people like me who didn't have it when they were just starting out. So if this is something that you find interesting, keep listening. Now, before I go into the history of my shop in particular, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on what fascinated me with vintage and when I started collecting. And I started collecting back when I was in elementary school, and I really could not tell you why specifically vintage became such a passion. It just was always there. And I can tell you exactly the moment that it changed my life. And that was when we used to live at the lakes, and we went to this little tiny country vintage shop, and I found this beautiful eggshell blue 1950s train case. And there's something about it. I'd never seen anything like it. It was beautiful. The shape, the color, the little bit of sparkle. So I bought it. And I still have it to this day, and I still use it. But it was something that to me was just so magical, knowing that this had been owned by someone else and the story that was behind it. I've always been fascinated by where things came from. And I've always wanted to kind of continue on that story. So it all started when I was young. And I never really had one particular thing I collected. If I saw something that fascinated me or I was interested in, I bought it, whether that be clothing, luggage, jewelry. I was obsessed with brooches. You name it. But more importantly, I really wanted to learn the history behind it. The maker, the label, the tag, when they stopped producing it, why it was so important. And it was a way for me to educate myself on something that at the time I really didn't have any understanding of. And I know you may hear this a lot from vintage collectors, but back when I first started collecting vintage, it wasn't a really big thing. You couldn't go online and look up things like you can now. You read. You really had to dig deep into finding information about a particular piece you have. It wasn't right at your fingertips, but that was the fun of it. It was a hunt. And that led into when I started saving garments, clothing. And that started about the time when I was in high school is when I really, really got fascinated with it. And some pieces I couldn't particularly wear myself, but I just thought they were so beautiful that I had this innate need to save them. I was horrified when I would see people buy vintage pieces and remake them, take them apart, especially when they were in perfect condition. So I made it my mission to buy whatever I could, and I would hang it up on my wall like a piece of art. I remember this 2-piece early 1950s gold Lurex set, and it had this beautiful checkerboard pattern, gold Lurex, gold satin, a cute little wiggle dress, and matching cocktail coat. And I hung it up on my wall with pride. It was the most expensive thing up until that point, vintage-wise, that I had ever purchased. And I believe that set was around $100, which those of you who collect vintage clothing of that era, you know that that is pretty cheap considering. But I just knew there was a purpose as to why I was collecting these things. I knew I may never wear them, but I was holding on to them for a reason. And there was a bigger picture that I hadn't known yet. And this went on for a while, all through college. Once I graduated, anytime I saw a piece that really, really caught my eye, I bought it. I would save and save and save. I worked multiple jobs, and it was my passion, but I felt like at the same time, it was my mission. This leads me to how my vintage shop started. And I opened a vintage shop on Etsy in 2013 called Hot Tramp Vintage. And I got Hot Tramp from my favorite David Bowie song, Rebel Rebel. And I thought, well, maybe this could be an extra way I can make money during my last year of college. I was in school for an English degree as well as a women and gender studies degree. And I thought, well, I might as well do something I love and make money. So I opened up my Etsy shop. And it was slow going at first. I reluctantly signed up for Instagram. It was really in its infancy in those days. But I did it. And I did make a fair amount of sales from that. But selling online was just something so different. And I wanted people to be able to touch the product, to see it in person. Online sales then and to this day are not my passion. And anybody that knows me can tell you that. My website for my shop currently, I can never keep up putting vintage on there because it sells fast in the shop. So really, that's not my preferred way. And Etsy wasn't either. And this was again before Etsy hiked up a lot of their intake on what they take out of your portion of your sales. So that's a whole other story. But it was really fun being able to sell some of the pieces I've collected and be able to pass those on to people that would cherish them and want them. And I remember one of the first things I'd sold on Etsy was this early 1950s navy seafoam green handkerchief. And I'd sold it to a woman whose husband was in the Navy, and it just held a really sentimental value to her. And she wanted to give that to her husband as a gift. So in my head, I thought, wow, this is really making a difference to people. People are really having this connection with the pieces I've been finding. So I graduated college. I still kept my Etsy shop up, and I had it up and running until about, I think it was 2019. And in that time span, I had worked many jobs. I worked at a clinic. I worked at a hair salon. I worked in corporate retail. But the common theme was I was helping other people with their businesses and their dreams, but yet mine was still on the back burner. And I was really, really getting frustrated with it. I knew there was something more I could be doing. And this tiny little online side hustle just wasn't cutting it. I wanted it to be my full-time job. The moment where it really clicked for me was on one of my trips down to Denver to see my great aunt. And our favorite pastime was going to vintage and antique shops. And remember being in downtown Denver, going to Boss Vintage. There was Gold Mine Vintage. I mean, all these amazing vintage shops. And being in them, I thought, gosh, this is the environment I want. This is the environment I want to create. And I remembered the whole ride back from Denver, because we love to drive, because that is the best time for being able to pick and find things on the road. I just knew that I had to do something to make this a reality, because I would always leave my heart in these places and wish I could create that environment of my own. So I did. And on June 1st, 2018, I officially opened and started Carmine and Hayworth Vintage. Albeit it was a totally different business model at the time. It was a little corner shop in the basement of the building that I'm currently in. And the only retail I really sold was coasters, perfume oils, and then the vintage that I had up on my Etsy shop. And I would rent things out and loan things out to photo shoots, shows, and then just keep working on my Etsy. And to keep some income coming in, I worked a freight job at our local mall from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then I'd head straight to my shop and keep working. And that lasted for, about 6 months, until I just knew I fell into that same trap of, I'll have this second job to make money to keep this dream going. But I was becoming burned out and exhausted. I mean, working those hours doing freight, mentally and physically, is really, really taxing on the body. I know a lot of you out there know exactly how I feel. So I made the decision to quit that job and really took the scary leap of doing this full time. I ended up renting out a space right next to mine that was a little bit bigger. It had a separate room for my rentals. I had my own office. I had a dressing room and a little bit bigger of an area to where I could actually open up during the day and have people come in and shop. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. We had painted the walls this bubblegum pink and teal, and I just thought it was the best thing ever. Looking back on it now, it was okay. But I was just excited. It was a place to call my own. And that was where people slowly started to find out about my shop. And I really got to meet people and form those connections and start really getting my roots in to this town and be able to kind of mark out a space of my own. But I knew that this just wasn't enough. There were more things that I could be doing. And I needed more space. I had so much that I wanted to do, but I just felt like I didn't have the tools to do it. So I went looking. I hadn't had much help when I first opened in terms of business steps and what to do. I'd gone to 2 small business, what they call here incubators, to talk about my ideas and to figure out what my first steps could be. You know, simple things like starting an LLC, getting a trade name, which really you could have found out online. That's not new information. And I was met by 2 men that I just don't think really understood what I wanted to do. And they kept telling me, you have such a niche business. I don't know how it's going to work for you, but I wish you good luck. No one's really doing what you're trying to do. So you're just kind of going to have to figure it out. Great. Where do I go from there? And I know I had always heard that there are some people that you get a lot of no's before you finally get a yes. And, oh boy, I continued to get a lot of no's. When I wanted to upgrade my space, I knew I needed the capital for it. I would need more merchandise. I wanted to start incorporating newer vintage-inspired things into my shop. And to place those initial orders, that costs a lot of money. a lot of minimum orders range between $500 and $1,000. And at that time, I just left my freight job where I was only getting paid like $12 or $10 an hour. And I was blowing through my savings just trying to do what I could and just trying to pay for it myself like I had always done. But on top of it, I was also paying off student loan debt. I was paying my way through college. So again, I didn't have that financial backing that some businesses have when they start. So I decided I would go to my bank and see if there was anything they could do to help me. And in my head, my reasoning and logic was, I've been banking with this bank since I was 15, when I got my first job as a dishwasher at the local airport. I opened my first savings account 4 months later with $600 in cash that I had saved up from tips when I was upgraded to a server. I had great credit at the time, and I thought they have to be able to help me. They have to. So I went in, I had my business plan, I had a financial projection. I did everything that the loan officer told me to do. I would work hours and hours at night, trying to make everything perfect. I even sent my business plan to one of the mentors at the small business incubator because he had said, send in your business plan, I'll look at it, I'll help you. Never heard anything back. So I went in with my folder and binder filled with documents, and I thought, surely they have to be able to help me. And I slid it over to my loan officer. She picked it up with all of her beautiful, sparkling, big diamond rings. And she looked at me and she asked, so you really can't just ask your parents for money? I paused and sat there, and this amount of shame literally poured over me. No, sorry, they can't. And that's all I could muster to say. And then I knew in that moment I was not going to get this business loan. And I felt a little defeated. I'm not going to lie. I felt horrible. I remember calling my mom crying, feeling like I had failed. But imagine how she felt. My parents are hardworking people. Ever since I was young, they would work long hours, nights, to be able to provide a good life for me and my sister. They had already done what they could. And that was instilled in me that if I want something, I have to work really hard for it and save. So I was never expecting them to give me money. I hadn't even asked. The thought really never occurred to me until this loan officer had said it. And then I immediately felt like, well, geez, I guess you really can't start a business unless you have money, unless your parents have money, unless someone's able to give that to you. And it took me a little bit to recover from that. My self-esteem was really battered. And I immediately just felt this pain that I could never be the business owner I wanted to be because I wasn't rich enough. I didn't have the money. And I felt like that's what you needed to be a business owner. That's what everybody's telling me. So now what am I supposed to do? And I decided then that no one else was going to help me. So I had to help myself. I spent the next few months after that really putting my nose to the grindstone and writing out how I saw my business and how I wanted it to be. At this point in time, I had piss in my veins. I had an axe to grind, and I wanted to prove to people I could do this. I had this idea for this shop in my head for as long as I can remember, and I was determined to make it happen. And those of you out there who are really passionate about what you want to do and what you see yourself doing in life, whether it be a small business, if you're an artist, a writer, if you make clothing, whatever it is, you all know what it's like for people to not believe in you and to think that you're not going to make it. But use that as your weapon. Use that as your motivation, because I guarantee you, anger can help you get a lot of things done sometimes. My therapist may not agree with that, but that's how I found a lot of my motivation. So I worked really hard on building up my social media presence. I realized that my Etsy shop just wasn't cutting it. I tried to keep as low prices as I could, and Etsy was starting to increase how much they were taking out of it, telling you that you had to offer free shipping, otherwise you'd get bumped down on their search pages. So that was the first thing I did to kind of cut my losses. I wanted to do things on my own terms. So in 2019, I officially ended my Etsy shop, and I focused just on my brick and mortar. I did a couple of markets. I joined some networking groups. I really tried whatever I could to just get my name out there and get out there what I was trying to do. And then an opportunity came up. There was a space in my building on the main level, right on one of the busiest streets in downtown Fargo. And it had been vacant for a few months, at least. And I walked into it, white walls, subfloor. There was really nothing to look at, but it just felt right. Something about it felt right, and I knew this is what I had to do. So I remember asking my landlord, how much is this space? And she paused, and she told me the rent and said, yeah, it may be too much for you. Because at the time, the rent I was paying in my smaller space, I think it was about $469. So even she didn't think I could do it. There's a theme here, you guys. And I knew I couldn't get a loan. I knew I would have to come up with this money by myself. And so that's what I did. I saved up money, I came up with a plan, and I knew the moment I got this space, it was game time. I did not have a moment to lose. So I upped my sales through my social media page. I kept setting aside money, even selling some things from my collection, just to help gain some capital. Because I wanted it so much and I saw what could be. And I did it. I raised the money to put down my security deposit and pay my first month's rent, which was a lot. But I did it. And on February 1st of 2020, I officially opened at my bigger brick and mortar space, windows and all. And again, it wasn't much to look at the time. We had painted it pink, I had these beautiful green curtains for my dressing room, some black accents, but there was still something missing. But I just kept rolling with it. And I did some events, got some people in, and the first month was actually really good. I was getting traffic. I was getting people in here. I was actually making sales. And I remember how nervous I was for my first sale in this new spot. It was a big deal because it's always a gamble. It's always a risk. I didn't know if anybody would know it to make my business. At the time, I couldn't even afford a sign. So really, no one even knew what my shop was, except for this decal I had on the window saying Carmine and Hayworth Vintage. But let's face it, a lot of people didn't look at that. So really, I had to work really hard to pull people in. And I did for that first month and a half. But then COVID happened. Now, I don't have to tell any of you how big of a blow COVID was, both personally and professionally, to everyone. We all know this. It's been a really hard couple of years. So when COVID happened, and a lot of businesses, including mine in downtown Fargo, had to shut down, it was a big blow. And kind of that panic set in. What are we going to do? So my shop closed on March 16th. And again, I had a really good month and a half run in my shop. I felt like I was really gaining momentum. And then that happened. And it was kind of that make or break moment where you have to really make some hard choices and decide what you're going to do to sustain your business. And with mine, it was a blessing and a curse that I was so new. I didn't have the audience and the customers that other established businesses had. However, I didn't have the blow to my sales and income like the same said businesses had. So I had to kind of work with that and use that to my advantage. So what I did was I decided I needed to do two things. I needed to really go back to what I hated the most, and that was e-commerce. And I had to strengthen it and make it easier for people to purchase and receive things from my shop. But then I also had to really expand what the mission and goal of my shop was. I knew now more than ever it became blatantly clear I couldn't just rely on vintage to keep my business going. Not even just during the pandemic, but in general. And this was kind of the slap in the face I needed to really just go for it and do everything that I had wanted to do, but was too scared, because right now I had to. It was either that or I close. So what I decided to do is I came back in for my normal work hours. I would be at home with my computer, because during that time, again, we were all quarantined. Nobody could go anywhere. Everything was closed. So I'd stay at home with my computer, and then I'd also come in for regular hours as if my shop was still open, and just sit in back on one of my couches and work and work and work. I built my website from the ground up. I figured out how to do all of it myself. It was hard. There was a big learning curve. There still is. I worked hard to get things up online, whether it be vintage or things I still had in the shop. But I knew that wasn't enough. So I decided to go out and really deep dive into commerce and into wholesale. But I knew I didn't want to just carry anything in my shop. It had to be things that evoked some kind of happiness or joy and had a purpose. So I decided that part of my business was going to be lifting up and carrying female-owned, female-made small businesses. So my business had that dual model. You have vintage, but then you have a pay-it-forward aspect on the other side. So from there, I started incorporating a lot more female-owned small businesses into my shop, from cards, purses, clothing, you name it. And I really started to kind of build a brand around that. And it worked. I was able to save up money to be able to do this. And it was hard. And I was really worried. But again, I was such a new business. I didn't have really an income model. Every month previous had been different because my business had gone through so many physical incarnations that I didn't really have numbers to look at. So that was freeing in a way because I knew I had room to play. And if it didn't work, well, I wasn't going to be out a lot because I didn't have much anyways. So all through the next few months, I would come into my shop as normal and just work like it was a regular business day, even though no one could come into my shop. I'd pack orders. I'd do social media. I would have people drive up front so I could hand out orders. I did what a lot of other businesses were doing at the time. You just make it work. You do what you can to survive. So then you fast forward a little bit to when slowly things started to reopening in June of that year. The world was different. People were different. All of us were different. Businesses were different. So I didn't know what to expect. And a lot of people didn't either. We were all wearing masks. People I met during the pandemic, I had never seen their faces. And I was building these relationships with them. But I wouldn't be able to pick them out on the street. It was odd. It was a really odd time. But the one thing that kind of brought us all together were all of these things in the shop, whether it be vintage I had just acquired, a candle that sparked some kind of memory, a purse that was so unnecessary but fun, and just little things that kind of brought people back and reminded them that there's still so much more to look forward to. So you just keep working from there, and every month you just had to take it day by day. Every month was different. Every day was different. And it's still that way. We still have a level of uncertainty. But that's kind of become the new normal, and how, as a business owner, you just have to roll with it because it can easily be taken away. But that shift and restructure, I think, is really what saved my business. It's what got me through the pandemic. Doing Facebook Lives, doing more outreach to where people could see, yes, I'm a real person. You may not know me, you may not have been in my shop yet, but just wait till you can. And that's what happened. Once people were getting more comfortable with coming out and going out into the public, I would have people that would watch me on my Facebook Lives and say that they had been really excited to finally be able to come in the shop after seeing me for so many months, talking about products and things that were happening. So now you flash forward, and it's October of 2021. And my business is so different. It looks different. It feels different. The shop has really come a long way, not just since 2018 when I first opened, but since February of 2020. And it's something that uncertainty and that self-esteem is still there, to where you do kind of have that imposter syndrome. I oftentimes think, did I just get lucky and not have to close my shop? When is the other shoe going to drop? When are things going to change again? And that's a fear and that's an anxiety that a lot of us have to deal with every day. And you just have to kind of incorporate it into part of your business. And I've been seeing a lot more now. People are getting the courage to start their own business, even in this time of uncertainty and risk. There's always risk involved to opening a business, but now more than ever, it can be make or break. But it's always worth it. Had I not made this giant leap, I would still be working jobs, helping other people with their dreams, and feeling like I was missing out on something. And that's a horrible, horrible feeling. But it's been a rough go. It really has. There have been a lot of tears. There have been a lot of anger. A lot of learning curves. And I'm still learning. I'm still making mistakes. But that's part of what can make a business grow. And especially in the area that I'm in vintage, there's not a business model for it. We're not a big city. Fargo's not Minneapolis or Denver or New York or LA. So it's different. More specific shops have to work that much harder to get seen and get known. And you have to get creative. And that's another thing that's kept me going, is I'm never satisfied. I'm never content with what I've done. I'm always striving to do something different, to do something better. it's a vice, but it's also what's keeping me motivated. But that's just my lesson, is it's never going to be easy. Once it does start getting easy, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing wrong? Because once your business becomes easy, something's been lost. Because life isn't easy. And you need to reevaluate what it is that you're doing and what your goal is. Now, I just briefly want to circle back to the topic of money and financing, because that's always one of the number one questions I get when I have customers come in who want to start their own small business. And when they've asked me about my experiences and I tell them, they get that level of fear that I had. And I always tell people, don't let your position in life be the determining factor on whether or not you live the life that you want. I didn't have money when I started my business, but I had the motivation and I had the idea. And if you believe in it that much, that's the biggest key. Because if you're not passionate about something, you failed before you even started. And it's funny because when I tell people my banker story, and I know I had this conversation with my accountant too when they had asked if I had gotten any business loans and what it had been like for me. And I was very upfront with them about my experience with this particular person and this particular bank. Okay, sorry, I'm back. More proof for you that I do record this podcast during shop hours, as you just heard by the front door ringing. So what I was saying is when I talk to people about my experience with my banker and just how hard it was to get anybody to take me seriously, my point is when I always talk to people, again, don't let money be the factor as to why you don't start a business, but then also don't let other people try to make you feel like you are not worth the investment in starting a business. And with this particular banker, I'm not going to give names, but I am going to roast them. I had gone back to her again to get my PPP loan. And surprise, surprise, she was less than helpful, would give me very short answers if I didn't qualify. She wouldn't tell me what I did wrong. Basically, it made me feel like I wasn't worth the time, and the payoff for her and the bank wasn't enough to make me a priority, or even someone that she should be giving any time of day to. And that was where my accountant directed me to another bank who was fabulous, approved me right away for one of the PPP loans, had said that I should have been approved for the past one, and that my banker at the time just, I don't think was doing her job, but that's a whole other story. But what I take away from that and my experience with that particular banker kind of just signified the struggle that I'd had. And you're going to get people who come from a place where they don't know what it's like to struggle with money and to not come from a place where you have to do everything yourself. And I don't want anybody to ever get discouraged like that, like the way I was, because that really kills dreams right there. And I remember posting a really heated post on Facebook about it when she had turned me down for the second time for a PPP loan, money that I so desperately needed. And I was feeling angry, especially because I found out that this particular banker does come from money. Her husband and his business got approved for tens of millions of dollars for his business from this bank, easier than anybody I knew at that bank who had been trying to get any kind of business loan or PPP loan or anything like that. And I was angry. I was hurt. I was angry. I felt like no one was on my side or trying to help. So I want to be that ally and that resource for other people so they don't get their dreams crushed. And again, I'm getting heated and long-winded. But that's just my point. Don't let anybody else make you feel or tell you that you can't do this, no matter what your business is, no matter how small of an idea, no matter where you are in the world. If you believe enough in it and you have that passion and drive, you can do it. I started a little vintage shop in Fargo, North Dakota with nothing. Only an idea I had written down on a piece of notebook paper and building layout plans that I had sketched out. That's where it started. And if you work hard enough and you just keep believing in yourself and having faith in yourself, you can do it. It is going to be hard. It will be hard. But you'll do it. You will get there and you'll look back and it'll all just make sense. Because every struggle you're going to have is what's going to make you a better business owner. It's what's going to make you have so much more empathy and appreciation for every single person that comes in through your door. At least I know I do. I never regret a day of it. Even days where I can't always buy what I want because I know that needs to go into my business, I don't regret it because this is the life I wanted and the life I worked really, really hard for. Well, my friends, that concludes episode 4 of Conversations in a Vintage Shop. And yes, I got very long-winded. I get very passionate about things and I talk a lot. I love to talk. And I really hope some of this helped you, or if you had any of the same experiences, you feel validated in your feelings with them. But if you lasted this long, got with me through these 40 plus minutes, thank you. And I hope you got something out of it. And I just really appreciate you guys spending the time listening. You don't have to, but you are. And I thank you. And I will see you next week. Bye.